Excellent. Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Hi, everyone. I'm Leilani Nishime. I'm one of the organizers of Seattle Asian American Film Festival, and I'm a professor of communication at the University of Washington. I'd like to welcome you to the closing night Q&A for Collective Memory Community Spaces. First, we at Seattle Asian American Film Festival would like to acknowledge the land that we reside on belongs to the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people. It's our obligation to stand in solidarity with the Duwamish as we work towards creating visibility for the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We are committed to dismantling ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and other systems of oppression that affect us all, and resist the erasure of Indigenous histories as we work towards honoring and inviting truth into this space. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our partner, Northwest Film Forum, and our sponsors, C89.5, ACLU Washington, University of Washington Department of Communication, the JACL, and our fiscal sponsor, Shumpike. All right, so let's get started. So why don't I start with having the panelists all introduce themselves. If you could tell us your name and your what film you're associated with and your role there. Okay, so Baljit, can we start with you?
Hi, I'm Baljit Sangra. I'm the director of Have You Forgotten Me? It's a little short, very little, like 4 minutes. Yeah, I'm the director of that. Do you want to know a bit about the movie?
Well, so I hopefully everyone's seen it by the time they've listened to our Q&A. Yeah, we'll definitely be asking more to hear more about the film as we go along. Akira, could you also introduce yourself?
Sure, my name's Akira Bach. I'm the co-director of Atomic Cafe, the noisiest corner in J-Town, and I made it with Tad Nakamura.
And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Takata, and I'm actually not the filmmaker. The filmmakers, Vanishing Seattle, Cynthia Brothers from Vanishing Seattle, and Martin Tran worked together to put together the film that they made. Thanks.
And Janet.
Hi, I'm Janet Chen. I'm associated with the Phoenix Bakery Sweets for the Street, and I'm the director-producer of the film.
Oh, great, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here and being willing to talk to us and our audience about your films. So I think the first question I'd like to ask is directed at the filmmakers. You know, I was amazed at kind of the richness of the stories you're hearing, the stories I was hearing, and the communities that you're talking about. And so can you tell me a little bit about what drew you to these subjects and how you first got started in making your films? And anyone who wants to can start.
Okay, I'll start. This film is one of 10. It's a series for Knowledge Network. And the producers of the film, Lantern Films, they researched a ton of amazing like historical gems in BC. So like all these shorts were commissioned. I think about 100 of them were commissioned for Knowledge Network for like BC's 150th birthday. So yeah, she found some real gems, and I think, you know, a lot of really diverse stories. And one was the oldest Sikh temple, still standing in North America. So yeah, when I got involved, I got to go over there and research it and look through archives and connect with Center for South Asian Studies at the university close by, Fraser Valley. And just like, okay, how do you tell this story in like 3 minutes? That's engaging and that touches at your heart, and it's a personal story, but also a bigger story. So this was lovely. We found these letters written way back from the 30s of a couple that were separated. He came over to work and always planned to bring his wife, but for various reasons, money, the depression, wasn't able to. And she's been waiting over a decade and a half. And she's like, have you forgotten me? Are you ever gonna come? I've lost my entire youth waiting for you. So it's just sort of reminded me of like, often when we hear historical stories, it's a lot of men coming here and working in the sawmills or doing this and that. But what about all the women, you know, and their place in this community? And, you know, a lot of women, she eventually does come, and we hear a little of that story, and it shows the bigger story of the community and how it grew. But a lot of women got left behind too. So anyways, just in reading that letter, it touched me emotionally. And so we thought this would be a really nice story to tell.
Yeah.
Personal story for the bigger story.
Well, and it's both, right? When I heard the title, like I love the way that it fits in with this personal story, but it's also that kind of bigger question, right? Have we forgotten about this community and forgotten, what our history is? How about Janet or Akira?
Sure. Yeah, the film is actually part of it's also part of a series that is part of UCLA Asian American Studies Center. I also work at UCLA. I'm a staff member. I also co-teach classes there. And it's a Chinese American history project, and we wanted to use films to represent the stories, have a visual element to it. Because our students, I'm sure Leilani as a professor, students gravitate towards films and visual elements a lot. And so it's one of 3 stories we really wanted to feature, and we really went with the themes first. So the first one we did was actually focused on Chinese herbalists, and then the second theme is food. And locally, we really looked at which institutions are around that really represents the community spaces that Chinese Americans have been to, that have affected Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. So Phoenix Bakery just kept coming up over and over again. It's been there for 80+ years, but the family is just so ingrained into the community, and they're now multi-generational, and they continue to be in the community, doing not only feeding the community, but doing a lot of other things. I touched upon it a little bit, that they founded co-founded 2 of the Asian American banks that a lot of Asian immigrants were able to be part of and take advantage of. So I think that story of the multi-generational and just their work, not just feeding community, but within the community, really captured me. Being an immigrant myself, and also loving a food lover, who isn't really within our community. So I think that's why we went with Phoenix Bakery.
Did you already have some sort of connection? Sorry, did you already have some sort of connection?
Okay. Well, the bakery, the Asian American Studies Center, is connected to a lot of organizations within the community, this local community in LA and Orange County, and a couple of the family members are also associated with a lot of different organizations. So we already didn't know of them. So like one of the brothers is part of Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. So I think, through all of those connections, and really I have not talked to one person where if they have grown up in LA, Orange County, that they didn't know about the bakery, and they have, memories just growing up eating there, and again, from different generations. So I think it really fit kind of everything perfectly.
Thank you.
So I have to start out by saying I love the Phoenix Bakery. I live in LA. And I also want to say thank you to the Seattle Asian American Film Festival for putting on the festival and for hosting this and giving us this opportunity. So in LA, there has been a big push for light rail and subway systems for the past 10 to 20 years or so. And about 6 or 7 years ago, they had determined that they're going to create a big hub right in Little Tokyo on one of the main blocks on the eastern end, basically, of Little Tokyo. And so there's an organization in Little Tokyo called Little Tokyo Service Center, and they've been around for a really long time, attempting to defend the territory, essentially, and defend the small businesses and and help new businesses start up in that particular community to try to keep, the authenticity and the history of that community alive. And so they dealt with the MTA, the Los Angeles's metro system, in because there was a plan to demolish the building where the Atomic Cafe once stood, right? And there's a person at LTSC, her name is Evelyn Yoshimura, and she is actually the one that had this idea to make a documentary about the Atomic Cafe, knowing that the building was no longer going to be there, and knowing that there was a need to preserve, that specific history within Little Tokyo, as part of the sort of the larger community history also. And so they were able to basically get a little bit of money from Metro to make this documentary. And Tad Nakamura, who was the original director of this project, asked me to come on and shoot it. And so that was my original role as basically, camera person. And over the course of time, I just got pulled in deeper and deeper, and I ended up editing the piece. And so eventually he basically gave me the co-directing credit. But, from the very first time that we shot an interview with Atomic Nancy, she was such a great character with so many wonderful stories. I knew that it had to be done, it had to be documented, and something had to exist to continue to tell that particular story.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I was in LA in the 80s. I was a teenager, but I had a very strict set of parents. I always knew about the Atomic Cafe. I always wanted to go, but there's no way my folks were going to let me go out at night to go there. So I got my sort of secondary glimpse in, at least seeing the video.
That's funny. I've heard that from a lot of different people too. So many parents were afraid of that particular restaurant.
Yeah.
But
it was fun, right? Your parents would let you go.
Yeah, but I didn't grow up in LA, and I moved to LA too late. It had already closed down, but nevertheless, I continued to hear stories about the cafe and Atomic Nancy, And so there's this kind of mythology built up in my mind about the place and the person, and it didn't really let me down once I, got to meet her.
It's interesting how you're talking about that. This kind of the impetus for it was the fact that they were going to knock down the building, right, and build the light rail. And I was interested in. It seemed like for several of the movies, there was kind of this moment, something going on in this moment, and I was sort of interested in maybe having you all respond to that. Like, what do you think that kind of the changes you're seeing, lots of changes going on in these films, if you are seeing that as being sort of part of the life cycle of a community, or if you think there's something particular going on right now that either is kind of prompting that change or maybe prompting us to look back in this moment. Maybe Karen, could you start us off?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. Since I'm not the filmmakers, but I understand why they decided to choose Busch and Four Seas as one of the pieces. Vanishing Seattle has pretty much been documenting the places in Seattle that mean a lot, that have a lot of history in Seattle. And in particular, the International District, the Chinatown International District, has been going through a lot of changes. Back in the 60s, for people who knew Uncle Bob Santos, there was a lot of API activism to protect the International District because the fear was, it's located really centrally, didn't want it to turn into another fast food, Uncle McDonald's or those kinds of businesses coming in, but we wanted to really keep the authenticity of the neighborhood and have it serve, stay a neighborhood with, the community centers and the library catering to Asian Americans. And And so, when you, Akira, when you were talking about Los Angeles, it sounds very familiar to what's happening in Seattle. They're building a new light rail station that's supposed to go east-west, right into the heart of the International District. And there's a lot of momentum from outside people to develop in the neighborhood. High-end, high-rise, 17 stories, towering over the small businesses and small buildings that are part of the historic district of the Chinatown International District. So it's been going on for a while. And, more recently, it's been a lot of international branches of different businesses coming in to try and stake a claim to the International District. And yes, it's still Asian, but it doesn't reflect kind of the culture and the history of the district, entrepreneurs running their small businesses versus a chain from someplace else. And Busch Garden, so the history of Busch Garden, really, the reason why it came about, I believe, is back in 2016, the building was bought with the intent of the people that bought it to develop the property and build a 17-story building in the place where Busch Garden stands. And some of the history you were describing about the Atomic Cafe, I feel like Busch Garden holds a place like that in the Seattle Chinatown International District community. It's been in that building since 1957, and it was a draw for all the it was before there were any big hotels or any of that stuff. It was the place where all the Japanese American community people had their weddings, funerals, fundraisers, everything happened at Busch Garden. And that was just one of the places that, in the Seafair Parade in Seattle, it has long history, and the Japanese community always had a float. They organized, a lot of the organization came out of that neighborhood. Over the years, Busch has continued to stay a place where people gather, and that's where a lot of the community activists would come, and people would be, come before a meeting to pre-plan, come after a meeting to debrief, board meetings, anything like that, and just people from the neighborhood after work. It's a great place gathering after work. When we started karaoke, it was a place where people connected through their songs and music. So it's got a long history. We've seen generations of people come in, the parents came, the kids came, they go through their life changes and their children come. And I think it's a place that we, really don't want to lose. The history was kind of housed in that building. So I think that really prompted, Vanishing Seattle, Cynthia Brothers, to really look at Busch as one of the places to highlight. And I think it is a change in Seattle, and we're trying to protect the neighborhood to keep it authentic. And it's not just about looking Asian with, appropriate colors or that type of thing, but it's the type of businesses, small business, entrepreneur, places that have grounding in our community that are what we're trying to preserve. Yeah.
Baljit or Janet? Baljit, I think you need to unmute.
Yeah, so where the temple is, it's in Abbotsford, which is about 45 minutes from Vancouver. Used to be just a farming area, still a lot of farming over there, but the temple just really stands out in the sense it's very frontier, kind of architecture. It's like out of a Western movie, but everything around it is like malls and a highway and subdivision. So it just kind of stands on its own, like, nothing really is like it around it. But thank God it's a historical site, got declared historical. And then in the basement downstairs, it's not that big, but they have a museum, so they change things up, and there's some stuff that stays. So you can kind of do a walkthrough and get some of the major moments in South Asian history in this place in Vancouver. In the West Coast.
And so
it's a gem. It's just a gem that, thank God, is still there. There's a bigger temple across the street. So for bigger weddings and functions, you can go there. But it's interesting is sometimes you don't appreciate what you have. I was there when it got inaugurated, had historical status. My parents went, they're like, you have to come, the prime minister is coming, it's a big deal. And I went and I was like, oh my God, wow, okay. I've never even been here before. I only come now, right? And it's well over 100 years. But there's a guest book, and I was kind of looking through there, and you see people from California, from the States, kind of feeling like this is a place that shows our roots, in North America, that's still standing and to walk through, because we really don't have that much. A lot of our history has been knocked down, and there's there's a street in Vancouver called Main Street that used to be called Punjabi Market or the Indian Market, but now there's very few stores. There's signage still, like in Punjabi, and some little art, just little snippets of history, but it's totally changing. It's not what I remember as a kid. Be really bustling shops. You could buy saris, you could buy sweets, you could get your incense. People are all meeting and talking, and and there was a community center where the seniors would hang out close by. But now a lot of the South Asian communities moved up to Surrey, and all the shops have kind of gone out, which is a suburb, and more in brand new kind of big malls, kind of like strip mall kind of vibe. So yeah, it seems like, our community maybe always wanted to kind of have bigger, newer, and just kind of got rid of the past. And now the next generation's like, no, that's important. Can we hold on to it? And young people are like kind of gathering and trying to make something happen on Main Street just to hold on to that history and saying, hey, let's record these stories. Not everything is just, having something big. But what I really loved about this program, it really speaks to Vancouver, because this is a city seriously going through gentrification. And I know in Chinatown, we're just seeing a lot of changes, condos going up, so a balance to be had, and working with the Chinese business association to keep the integrity, and it's just the oldest, most beautiful place that you could go in Vancouver left, right? And I just really hope it doesn't change. But there's really close to there is Japantown, and that's a real push of gentrification, so a lot of that's really changed quickly. So I really love this program because, this is super important. It's our history. And you have to be at the table in these kind of conversations. It can't just be developers, or they're going to knock everything down and not care about that history. But when, it means a lot to the next generation. And yeah, it's just kind of that thing. I like this project because I got to, here I am, 45 minutes, and I've gone there once when it got inaugurated, and a couple of times later when I got to do this film. But through this project, I got to interview all these pioneer families and hear their stories. So it was a real gift. But yeah, just this whole program really resonates with me being in Vancouver and the stories, yeah, and the Asian history here.
Janet, hearing these stories, it's actually amazing that Phoenix Bakery is still out there chugging along. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it sounds like just hearing everyone talk about, Seattle and Vancouver, that it's all happening all over. LA definitely, Chinatown and Little Tokyo are definitely getting more and more gentrified. But I think Phoenix Bakery, which is in Chinatown, they were in Old Chinatown, and then they moved to the new Chinatown, and they've been able to survive because they really adapt with the times. I think the family, they're able to kind of see how the community is feeling because they are involved in so many different areas, and they really adapt, I think, the different foods that they serve, and also they recognize that they have different ethnic populations coming in as customers, so they adapt. But I think the one thing that they always stick to is what their grandparents originally intended the bakery to be, which is serving the community, whoever that is. It started with the Chinese immigrants, but now it's grown into kind of the population that lives in Chinatown, which is a mix of still some Chinese immigrants, and of course different Asian immigrants and the Latinx community, and LA is kind of just such a, especially in the downtown area, it's full of so many different ethnic groups. So I think they recognize that, and because they live in that area too. So yeah, I mean, when I heard, and I think, you know, to some people probably outside of California, 80+ years is nothing, you know, because I've heard about eateries in New York that is 100 years plus, and but I think locally it really is impressive, and you know, when I talk to them about it, to me, what I find the most is that because they continue to work with the community. I mean, that's so important. And to see what the community needs on all levels, not just, you know, the food aspect, but also how the community itself is changing and adapt to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially thinking about how, you know, 80 years is such a long time, partly because of the kind of perception that Asians have always just gotten here, right? Or that we're, you know, that we don't really belong. And to think about having a business that's been there for 80 years, it's really hard to kind of make an argument that they're not, you know, they're clearly part of the fabric, right, of Los Angeles. So
yeah, it's definitely very grounding. It's for us to think about that has existed there through as Chinatown has evolved, definitely.
Yeah. So I was thinking about one of the interesting things about the filmmaking for me was, you know, it's a little ironic considering the fact that we're doing this, we're doing this online, right, on Zoom. But, you know, what really struck me when I was seeing the films was the energy, or maybe the community that comes from being face to face and being in those kind of actual spaces together. So I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about, you know, what difference it makes, or why do you think it matters to have these kinds of spaces and preserve the kinds of community spaces that you see in these films? Did you?
Well, I mean, I'm really thankful that place is there, because you could take the next generation, and they, you know, they have a little small museum. It's not a really big, it's an old temple, right? Started in 1907, I think finished in 1911. And it was the sawmill workers that made it, that they kind of stayed in little camps and, you know, brought the wood up and made it. And it took, you know, years to make it. But now when you go there and you can see, you know, that's the original wood, this is dated. And they, you know, in the university, Fraser Valley University, there's a South Asian study. So they've really, you know, taken on that space too, and changing the museum and putting up, so school trips go through there, people come through there. When people come up to Vancouver, like South Asians, they'll go there often. Just, it's only building kind of standing that you could imagine what it'd be like then. And they have some of that history downstairs. But the whole idea is, when I was there, is like, okay, well, if we were going to do a story, you know, if these walls could talk, what would they say? You know, what are some of the stories? And just hearing from the community. I mean, too bad it was a short. I would love to go back and do more, but there's like, wow, I had no idea. And then the family that we picked, I mean, they came with their grandkids, and he's talking about his dad. So it was like 4 generations. So that building is like where they feel most at home, right? They see their, you know, grandparents, even though they were gone, but having spent time there, sat there, or in the community, or organizing. I mean, that building was there when, say, the Komagata Maru was, you know, not allowed to land in Burrard Inlet, and people organized and, you know, and put money to hire a lawyer and get food out, you know, on canoes. So these are all these, so there's a community space where so much of our history is connected. And you know, and there'd be other temples, and they would, you know, they were kind of organized together. And also there were meetings secretly to try to have independence in India. You know, there was this called Ghadar Party movement. Anyway, so you hear stories about that, and how, you know, they'd have a paper, and this is treason. You're literally trying to organize to get independence, you know, in India in the, you know, in the early 1900s. So just like hearing those kind of stories. So it's a super important space. And because it's so intimate, you know, I was there just when we were filming, we saw people just come in, wander around, just, you know, take pictures on those famous stairs in the front. And Yeah, it's good. You need these spaces. We really need to connect, and then you often see people from different generations. So it's such a great opportunity to talk to people, like, you know, about that space in our history. I just feel really lucky that somebody had the foresight and not tear it down when they built a bigger one across the street. Typically, they would have sold that land and just gone with that one. The fact that it's still standing, it's pretty remarkable. Because we've had another temple in Vancouver, but when they found a bigger space, they sold that and it's gone. So we never really have that. So I'm just really happy that it's there and more appreciative through this project.
Akira, do you want to maybe
Sure.
talk a bit
Yep.
about the space, about Atomic Cafe?
Sure. So the original Atomic Cafe, which was started by Atomic Nancy's parents, they opened it in 1946, right after World War II, right after they had gotten out of the camps. And so according to Nancy, they wanted to cater to the local Japanese American community that was coming back, but they were also obviously open to all the other customers that wanted to come through, right? And so during the war, Little Tokyo had become what was called Bronzeville, because when all the Japanese Americans were forcibly removed, a lot of African Americans moved into that particular neighborhood. So there was still a mix, going on at that time. Plus, right across the bridge is Boyle Heights, East LA. So there were a lot of, Chicano, Mexican clientele that would also come in. So they were open and welcoming to everyone, right? And so that just kind of was the trend for the family. And when Nancy took over, she continued to cater to those particular, groups, but she was a musician at heart, right? She was actually one of the original members of Hiroshima, which is considered to be like, I don't know if you guys have even heard of Hiroshima, but they're considered to be like the most famous Japanese American band that has ever existed, and she was the original singer. But she got out of that when she got married, right? And her husband didn't want her to do that anymore. And he wanted to, take over the business with Nancy, because Nancy's father was ill. So because she was a musician, she really wanted to put her own stamp on the restaurant, right? That's why she put, her kind of music into the jukebox. She invited her friends, and a lot of them were musicians, and just through word of mouth, all these other young artist types started to frequent the restaurant. So she created a totally different environment for this new clientele. And it was very purposeful too, right? Because she considered herself to be a misfit, and everyone else that was showing up, she also saw them as misfits. They didn't have another place that they could call home, right? Or like this creative space where people could mix and mingle and stuff like that, and listen to really loud music, whether it was punk or whatever, rhythm and blues, or, old Japanese songs or Hawaiian music. It's just this crazy eclectic mix. So yeah, essentially she wanted a place for these artist types, to be able to meet. And in my opinion, that is vital, for any sort of artistic community. Little Tokyo is bordered by the Artist District, right, which is just before the bridge to East LA, in the Warehouse District, which is also changing at this point. But all those people that were the original inhabitants of those warehouse lofts, they would go over there. And she, like I said, she's just creating a safe space, a creative space for a lot of really creative people.
Yeah, the idea of the kind of music, all right, being a point where people connect up. It was reminding me a lot of the film that we're watching with Busch Garden as well. I think there's some way that singing or music that kind of allows people to come together who maybe otherwise might not have, right, might not be hanging out together.
Yeah, actually, um, yeah, there's a lot of that resonates. So the music, when we started karaoke, it didn't start out, I think when we first started out, it was like mostly all API customers, and it wasn't well known in the United States. And so it was really kind of owned by the API community, and you could see the change over time, who came in, who sang, and, the energy that came because of it. But I think what I really loved about karaoke, and I lived in Japan for a long time. I never did any karaoke, but the one thing that I loved about it here is that, everybody sings the songs that they connect with. Whatever that song is, they pick that song, and somehow when they're singing it, they communicate their energy, their love for this song. And it's not about how good they sing, it's about that they're singing something that they love. And I think that way of sharing is a different way, different than just talking, but people feel that energy, and they really make connections. And so it wouldn't be surprising in any one night, some people sitting at one table here could go start connecting with a person that's sitting on another table across the room, and before you know it, you have these connections throughout, and a lot of them didn't know each other at all. But that kind of creates, one kind of community just through music. And the other thing about, community activism, I think that's another place. There's young people that were in different places in their lives. They come in and they meet up with their friends, and young and up and coming leaders in the community. We had mentors like Uncle Bob who would mentor the young people, and those kinds of connections throughout are something that has, kept Busch going as a place where it's a gathering place. And over the years, you see people through all their life changes, and having that kind of home to connect to. It is, a lot of people will say it's their second home. You can come in and look for somebody that and a lot of the staff, the bartenders, are people that stuck around for a really long time. So we could see somebody walk in, they haven't walked in for years, and we would be able to connect because of the longevity of the place and of the people. So that's something I think is really important. We don't want to lose those kind of places and those kind of connections.
Yeah, and I think it's really tied to the community activism that has gone on and is going on in the ID, right? I think to be able to push back against some of the development, it's happening because I think people are gathering in those spaces. So I think we're getting close to the end now. So I wanted to ask if you all be willing to talk a little bit about, maybe update us and tell us, if there's been any developments about the places that you're talking about, or maybe projects that you're working on. Just sort of thinking in the future a little bit. Janet, would you be willing to start us out?
Sure. So the bakery is still open. They just like a lot of I think mom and pop businesses in Chinatown, they had a hard time in the beginning of the pandemic, but because of their just loyal customers and generations of customers, they've been able to remain open, and they just with limited hours. The same family, the Chan family, is still running it. Yeah, they're hopeful that they can get through the pandemic. But everything, all of the succession plans are on hold because of that. So, the generation the current generation is still running it right now.
You had mentioned this is part of maybe a 3-part film.
Right. So the series is really, I mean, I would love to actually expand on their story because there's just so much there. Because we touched a little bit on the 2 banks, Cafe Bank and East West Bank that the family is also involved in founding. But I think for now, that story, the bakery story is done for now. And then the next story that we want to explore in the series is has to do with the Chinese railroad workers. So that's kind of up and coming. And then I will also be working, before that, I'll be working on an oral histories documentary project about the founders of the Asian American movement in Southern California. So that's also, because I think a lot of, folks know about the founders and activists in the Bay Area, which of course it kind of kickstarted everything. But very quickly I also traveled down to LA. So we've been interviewing a lot of those folks, and when it's safe again, we'll be meeting with more of them.
Wow, that sounds like a fantastic project. Hopefully you'll send it to the film festival when it's done.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, and thank you for having me here. It's been great.
Anybody else?
I'll just say that so the Atomic Cafe is no longer there. If you watch the film, you'll know that.
Yeah.
There's still a big hole in the ground where it once was, because that metro hub is still being built, and it's not going to be done for at least, I think, another 2 years or so, maybe even 3. I'm not sure. I guess it takes a really long time because they're actually connecting 3 different lines. So there's going to be a lot of people going in and out of that particular hub. I'll say that Zen Sekizawa, Nancy's daughter, is super active in Little Tokyo progressive, grassroots politics, working to, defend that community and that space. And Nancy is also, she also gets on board. So they're both out there, although they don't have a business there anymore. I know that it's really close to their hearts, and so I think they put in a lot of effort to protect it.
And are you working on anything?
Yeah, I'm working on a bunch of different things. One is a documentary about an Issei photographer whose name was Wakaji Matsumoto, who took a lot of really amazing photographs in LA in the 1920s and 30s, and returned to Hiroshima, where he was from originally, at a really bad time, like in the late 30s, started, taking photographs over there. His business was eventually destroyed by the dropping of the atomic bomb, and his prints were basically stored away in a shed for decades, and then kind of recently one of his grandsons rediscovered them. So it's like a treasure trove of all these photos that really documented Japanese American life in Los Angeles in the 20s and 30s, and life in Hiroshima from the mid 30s up until about 41 or so. And if you can imagine, there's very few existing photos of Hiroshima specifically, right? Because everything was wiped out. So that's one project. I'm also working on a couple of other narrative scripts. So I'm all over the place.
Good, gotta keep hustling, right?
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
Let's see. Well, I'm working on a couple projects. One's a narrative script. I got some development money. Sort of a coming of age story with a South Asian family in East Side Vancouver in the 80s. Sort of like, it's a narrative story, but also you could pepper it with historical moments that kind of anchor you in time and place and belonging here. Just find like so many of the films that, on the Canadian landscape don't really include us. So it's time to take some of that space. So that, I'm just working on some documentaries, and I did a documentary, it was out last year, and it played at your sister festival, Tasvir, the South Asian Film Festival. It's a feature doc called Because We're Girls, and it's about impact of sexual violence on these three sisters, and they take their abuser, who was their cousin, all the way to the Supreme Court. And I follow that journey, but I also kind of go back in time and look at, like, you know, they were living in a northern town and just, you know, very small Indian community, and bullying and racism and fear and all those things that might make you not feel that you could talk, you know, and your parents working 2 jobs and bringing all this family over. So I look at a lot of that, which is such a very common story of the diaspora, like a new immigrant family coming. So that's called Because We're Girls, and you can catch that on Amazon Prime. But that's so that gave me confidence to try now to do narrative as a feature.
Are you writing the?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. And there's sort of been a push, and I think it's been pushed by filmmakers of color, saying, you know, we need some space in the ecosystem, and, you know, funding that it hasn't been fair. So there's been a lot of that playing out in our industry. So there's been a lot of initiatives to kind of do that. So I've been lucky that, you know, those opportunities where they're like, okay, yeah, you're right. That has been missing, and we need to, like, you know, put some money towards that, or have people who jury be reflective of your community, you know, or the gatekeepers being reflective of your community. So that's like a real big conversation going up here, and yeah, so that's good, and it's really created a great space for community amongst BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color filmmakers, and in terms of supporting us, and, you know, just changing that narrative. I mean, you know, we're always like, oh yeah, please, please. And now we're like, no, man, we need to be at the table. So it's pretty cool time to be in the arts, I think, right now.
Yeah, I feel like that too.
Awesome.
Karen, can you, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I can't say where the filmmakers are going, but I Vanishing Seattle continues to, and Martin Tran continue to kind of highlight how Seattle's changing, because I think this Chinatown International District is one of the last places where some of those old things, you know, are still grounded in community, and I'd like to see it continue. So I'm hoping we'll see more from them on that. And as far as Busch goes, you know, things have been changing in the neighborhood because of COVID, and because we were a karaoke place. You know, we ended up closing down, and it didn't seem safe for all this time to really be open doing that kind of business. And so I thought, well, you know, the timing of things the way they were, that we do have, I won't say did, we do have a plan to move into a new building that's going to be built. They just initiated their groundbreaking, and it's going to be in a place building called Uncle Bob's Place. And so we're really excited about that, to be part of that, because I think the new space is going to represent a lot of the history of the neighborhood. The place where we're going to be is where the Four Cs is, and so that whole building will be kind of it'll be the placeholder for those places that were in the community. And so I'm really excited that we can continue the spirit and the energy of the neighborhood of Busch in the new space. It'll be a little while, but we're very excited about that. And it is a place, because it is a place where everybody can come together, that that I'm looking forward to that time. So looking ahead.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are looking forward to that. Well, both, you know, being face to face, but I think also the project, Uncle Bob's Place. I think there's a lot. There seems to be a lot of energy and a lot of hope. Feeling like, you know, that we're gonna be able to keep the ID as a space that, you know, as a community space.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. I wanted to thank all of the filmmakers for being here and joining us, and also to thank the community out there for joining us virtually for SAAFF 2021 and tuning into this conversation. So keep an eye out for our Facebook and Instagram tonight. We'll be sharing our jury and festival awards soon after this. Our Audience Choice Awards will be announced on Friday, March 19th. So please remember to vote for films inventive after watching them for our Audience Choice Awards. And make sure to take our audience participation survey. That helps us collect information for grants. So tonight is closing night. So make sure this is your last chance to catch films. Go to SeattleAAFF.org. That's our website to order more tickets before it's too late. Thank you for joining us. Oh, one more thing. So make sure that you start watching the movies by 11:59 tonight. If you start watching it by 11:59 tonight, you have 48 hours to watch the films. Thanks again for joining us for the 9th Annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival, and have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.